One island in the Pacific. No towns, no help. Two boats arrived. One story survived. Years later, the truth is still missing, and no one can fully explain what happened there. Some places look like paradise until you stay long enough to notice what feels wrong. In the middle of the Pacific Ocean lies Palmyra Atoll, a ring of coral islands surrounded by clear blue water. From above it looks untouched, beautiful, almost unreal. But those who have spent time there describe something very different. Not danger you can see, but something you feel. A quiet, persistent sense that you shouldn't be there at all. Palmyra sits roughly halfway between Hawaii and American Samoa. There are no cities, no permanent residents, and no real signs of civilization. Just dense tropical vegetation, white sand beaches, and silent lagoons. On paper, it's a perfect island, but historically, every attempt to settle here has failed. Expeditions ended early, crews abandoned their plans, and over time, the atoll developed a reputation few places ever do. The first recorded encounter dates back to 1798 when an American ship wrecked near the reef. Survivors struggled to reach land through waters filled with sharks. Out of dozens of crew members, only a handful made it ashore. When rescue finally arrived, only 3 were still alive. What they experienced on the island was never fully documented, but reports described fear, confusion, and something they couldn't explain. Over the years, similar incidents followed. Ships reported reefs appearing where none were marked. Others vanished without a trace. In one case, a crew was later found on the island, but no clear cause of death could be determined. No signs of starvation, no visible injuries, just unanswered questions. Slowly, a pattern began to form. Palmyra was not just remote, it was unpredictable. Legends began to grow around the island. Some spoke of hidden treasure buried by pirates. Others believed the island itself was somehow cursed. These stories were never proven, but they persisted for generations. Sailors began avoiding the atoll whenever possible, and those who did visit often reported something strange, a constant tension as if the island was quietly resisting their presence. During World War II, the United States established a military base on Palmyra. Hundreds of personnel were stationed there, turning the isolated atoll into an active outpost. At first, everything seemed normal. Supplies were stable. The environment was manageable. But after a few weeks, something began to change, not physically, but mentally. Soldiers reported unusual stress, irritability, and anxiety. Conflicts between crew members became more frequent. Discipline began to break down. Some described a constant sense of unease that never fully disappeared. Officers struggled to maintain order despite the absence of combat or direct threat. Official reports later attributed it to isolation, but many who served there believed that explanation wasn't enough. After the war ended, the base was abandoned. Palmyra returned to silence. For years, only occasional researchers and sailors visited the island. Most stayed briefly. Few returned twice. And then, in the summer of 1974, a new chapter of the island's story began. One that would finally bring global attention to this remote and unsettling place. A couple named Malcolm and Eleanor Graham arrived at Palmyra aboard their yacht. They were experienced travelers, well prepared and financially stable. Their vessel was fully equipped, stocked with supplies, and capable of long-term living. For them, the island was not a danger. It was an opportunity, like a place to slow down and spend time away from the modern world. Not long after they arrived, another boat appeared near the island. Two people were on board and their lifestyle was very different. Their vessel looked old and unstable. It was not built for long journeys. Supplies were limited and their situation seemed uncertain. Their plan was simple: stay on the island, survive day by day, and avoid attention. From the very beginning, the two groups had little in common. The contrast between them quickly created tension. The Grahams preferred order, routine, and careful planning. The newcomers lived differently. They focused on the present and reacted to whatever happened next. At first, both sides tried to keep distance, but on a small island that is never easy. Paths cross, spaces overlap, and over time, even small differences begin to feel more serious than they really are. Eleanor reportedly felt uncomfortable with the situation. The isolation of the island made every interaction more intense. There were no authorities, no nearby help, and no easy way to leave on short notice. Even minor disagreements carried more weight. Malcolm, however, remained focused on their original plan. He believed they could continue their stay without issue, despite the growing unease. Weeks passed, and life on the island settled into a fragile balance. The lagoon remained calm, the weather predictable, and the days repetitive. Yet beneath that surface, tension continued to build. Without distractions, without outside contact, small concerns became constant thoughts. And in a place like Palmyra, silence often makes things feel louder than they are. Then, toward the end of August 1974, everything changed. The Grahams disappeared. There were no immediate signs of struggle, no clear explanation, and no witnesses beyond the other pair on the island. Their yacht remained. Some of their belongings were still in place, but Malcolm and Eleanor themselves were gone. The second group later left the island using the Grahams' yacht, which had been altered and repainted. When they reached Honolulu, they explained that the couple had been lost at sea during a routine trip. According to their version, they had simply discovered the empty vessel and used it to escape the island. Authorities, however, were not convinced. An investigation followed. Without physical evidence or confirmed remains, it was difficult to establish exactly what had happened. The case remained unclear, and while suspicions were strong, proving a crime was another matter entirely. Eventually, charges related to the unauthorized use of the yacht were brought forward, but the full story remained unresolved. For several years, the mystery remained incomplete. The island returned once again to silence, holding its secrets as it always had. Then in 1981, a visitor walking along one of Palmyra's beaches made a discovery that would reopen the case and change everything. Among the sand and debris, a small object caught the sunlight, something that didn't belong to the natural environment. Nearby, additional remains were found, along with a container that had clearly been placed there intentionally. Investigators were called in, and the area was carefully examined. What they uncovered provided the first real answers. Forensic analysis confirmed that the remains belonged to Eleanor Graham. Evidence indicated that her death had not been accidental. There were clear signs that someone had attempted to conceal what had happened. The discovery transformed the case from a disappearance into a confirmed criminal investigation. Authorities reopened the case and began tracking the individuals who had last been seen with the Grahams. Years had passed, but eventually arrests were made. The investigation focused on reconstructing events on the island, a difficult task given the lack of witnesses and the passage of time. During the trial, prosecutors presented a narrative based on available evidence, behavior patterns, and inconsistencies in earlier statements. The defense argued that key details were missing and that the case relied too heavily on assumptions. With no complete timeline and limited physical proof, the outcome depended on interpretation. In the end, one individual was found responsible and received a life sentence. The second was acquitted. Even after the verdict, questions remained. Without a full account of what happened on the island, the case never reached complete closure. Some details were clarified, but others were left unresolved. Over time, books and documentaries revisited the story, each offering a different perspective. Some focused on the crime itself, others explored the setting, the isolation, the tension, and the psychological pressure of living in such a remote place. The island became as central to the story as the people involved. Today, Palmyra Atoll is a protected nature reserve under U.S. administration. There are no permanent residents. Only small teams of researchers and conservation staff rotate through the island. Strict controls limit access and visits are rare. The atoll remains largely untouched, both physically and historically. The environment itself presents challenges. Dense vegetation, aggressive insect populations, and invasive species make long-term living difficult. The surrounding waters are active with marine life, including predators. Even without any mystery, Palmyra is not an easy place to stay. But those who visit often describe something beyond the physical environment. Many report an unusual sense of discomfort. Not fear in a direct or immediate way, but a constant awareness that feels difficult to explain. Some describe it as psychological pressure. Others say it feels like being observed, even when completely alone. These experiences vary, but the pattern is consistent. Scientists tend to explain these reactions through isolation, environmental stress, and the absence of familiar stimuli. When the human brain is removed from normal surroundings, it begins to interpret silence and emptiness differently. Small sounds become significant, shadows seem unusual, the mind fills in gaps, yet not everyone is satisfied with that explanation. For some, the history of the island adds weight to the experience. Shipwrecks, disappearances, unexplained reports, all layered over centuries. Whether coincidence or pattern, the stories continue to shape how people perceive Palmyra. Even experienced sailors familiar with remote environments often choose to avoid stopping there. It's not a navigational issue. The atoll is well documented and clearly marked on modern maps. The hesitation comes from reputation, a collection of stories that over time become difficult to ignore. The case of the Grahams remains the most well-known incident connected to the island. Unlike older stories, it is documented, investigated, and partially resolved. It provides a real human element within a place already surrounded by uncertainty. And yet, even this case leaves unanswered questions. What exactly happened during those final days on the island is still debated. Without a complete timeline, the sequence of events can only be estimated. Each version of the story depends on interpretation, perspective, and the limited evidence that was recovered years later. Some believe the outcome was inevitable, that isolation, tension, and conflicting personalities created a situation that could only end one way. Others argue that the island itself played a role, not through anything supernatural, but through the pressure it places on those who stay too long. In extreme environments, human behavior can change in subtle ways. Decision-making shifts. Emotions become less predictable. Small disagreements can escalate. Over time, the line between rational and irrational thinking becomes harder to define. Palmyra, with its silence and isolation, amplifies these effects. Whether the island is truly unusual or simply misunderstood remains open to interpretation. There is no scientific proof of anything beyond environmental and psychological factors, and yet the consistency of personal accounts continues to raise questions. Stories like this often exist between fact and perception. The events themselves are real. The interpretations vary. Over time, details blur and narratives evolve. What remains constant is the sense that Palmyra is different, not because of what can be proven, but because of how it is experienced. For those who study remote environments, the island offers valuable insight into human behavior under isolation. For others, it represents something less defined, a place where history and atmosphere combine to create a lasting impression. Today, the atoll remains quiet. No cities, no crowds, no permanent presence, just wind, water, and the same landscape that has remained unchanged for centuries. The events that took place there have faded into history, but the questions they raised still remain. Visitors still arrive from time to time, usually for research or conservation work. Most stay only as long as necessary, and when they leave, many describe a sense of relief, as if they are returning to something familiar after being somewhere that never quite felt right. Palmyra Atoll continues to exist in that space between reality and reputation, a real place with real history, but surrounded by stories that are difficult to fully explain. Whether those stories reflect something external or something within us is still uncertain. In the end, the island doesn't provide clear answers. It never has. It simply remains quiet, remote, and unchanged. A place that looks like paradise until you begin to question why so many who have been there choose not to return.